Hello you guys, and welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be part 2 of me analyzing the Scream franchise, so if you haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out and make sure to come back to this video when you're finished. If you're all caught up, let's jump right into the video. You guys may remember a video I did a few weeks ago where I analyzed some of the aspects of psychological horror. In that video I mentioned that there was a lot of horror remakes and reboots around that era, and Scream is no exception. After all, the entire purpose of Scream as a franchise was to serve commentary in a satirical manner while delivering a fun and effective horror movie. But how do you do this in the year 2011? Well, look at the current state of horror. What are the tropes and how do they work? I always thought that the Scream franchise did a great job of this considering the times that they were working in and how aware audiences were of this. Because these films were a product of their time, it's really hard to recognize any of these tropes unless you do have these token characters that are there to guide you through what makes a slasher movie great. Unfortunately, Randy died in the second film, so now we have these guys? Just about each film in the Scream franchise tackles the idea of serving commentary on the slasher genre along with a few other things. Scream 2 serves the additional commentary on sequels, and 3 serves the additional commentary on the trilogy phenomenon that was ever so present in the slasher genre. And for a while, that was it. There wasn't really anything else to satirize as we had run out of material to analyze. All we were getting in the 2000s were reboots and remakes, so that's exactly what Scream gave us. 11 years after the previous installment, Scream 4 opened at number 2 in the box office with an underwhelming $18 million opening weekend. This film would eventually make its budget back and overall grossed close to $100 million worldwide. So commercially, this film did fine. Nothing amazing, but it did well enough to garner another installment. As far as how this film was received, it seems kind of in the middle. I know a lot of people who hate this movie, and I know a lot of people who actually think it's pretty great, so let's get into it. For the most part, I don't really see any of these Scream movies as bad except for the third one, and even then I have quite a bit of fun with that movie. Scream 4 was able to recapture the basic premise of what the first film was trying to do by satirizing and serving commentary on a genre that was oversaturated with the same tropes over and over again. While I don't think this film does it as subtly or as poignant as the original, it is still able to offer a lot of genuinely great moments and reignites the fun concept that the franchise is famous for. This film also offers a return to form for Kevin Williamson, returning as writer for the installment after stepping back from writing the third film. Not only is this film a return to the smart and clever writing, but a vengeful retaliation to the media by making this film one of the goriest and brutal installments since the original. I will admit, I think the opening kill, if you could even call it that, is a bit much. While it is reinstating some similar tropes that we are used to, it's also giving us just a glimpse of what's to come. Doing the film within a film trope was fun in Scream 2, but Scream 4 says, hey, what if we do a film within a film within a film? In a way, this opening is sort of serving as contextual exposition, and what I mean by that is that it sets up this idea that in the context of this film's universe, Sidney's character is pretty much the blueprint for what people look at in the slasher genre. And in case that's not subtle enough, these characters pretty much establish this in every scene.
What about Sidney? No offense, but that'd be a big deal for Cinema Club. A visit from Sidney Prescott? I mean, she's the star.
All this really tells us as an audience is that in the eyes of these characters, Sidney is famous, and this is important. By letting us know that there are now multiple installments of Stab, we understand that she is a big deal. While I think this is an important idea to convey, I think it could have been handled slightly better. After all, this idea has to work for the climax of the film to be effective. Moving past this, we are introduced to the new characters, all of whom are basically knockoffs of a number of characters that were present early in the series, the biggest of which being the film buff characters who basically replace Randy. Most of the time when a large number of new characters are introduced in a franchise, I'm incredibly weary because most of the time it just feels like they're trying to pass on the film's legacy in a lazy and unmotivated manner. But in the case of Scream 4, it actually works surprisingly well. Making Jill the cousin of Sidney Prescott makes it easier as an audience for us to care for these characters, and it sets up a great reveal for both of the killers. Because her character is introduced as someone who is linked to Sidney, we are more inclined to care about her while also being completely unaware that she has any malicious intent whatsoever. We also are introduced to new characters through her, and this sort of breaks down the resistance for an audience who feels like maybe a character has to earn their place in any given franchise. While the newer characters in this film do work most of the time, this movie really only works as well as it does because of the original cast that's also present. I don't think anyone would disagree when I say that Sydney's character is a huge element of what makes these films work as well as they do. Her character has become consistently stronger as each installment passes, but there's one scene in particular in Scream 4 that really propels this idea forward. The scene where Jill's friend is being killed in the house next door. I really like this moment for two reasons. The first is that it really shows how Sydney's character has grown, not only in a linear sense but as a human being. Instead of grabbing Jill and running in another direction, she runs into the house where Ghostface is literally murdering someone, risking her own life to save one of Jill's friends. At this point, she's been through this 3 times, and it shows. The second reason is that this is the first moment where this film decides to not hold back. In part 1, I mentioned that the studio asked Wes Craven to tone down the violence and goriness of the film in an attempt to avoid backlash from the media. Because of this request, so much of that film felt like it was missing some of the fun that came with the first 2 Scream movies. This might feel like a small detail, but overall, it gives the film more tension. The first movie doesn't work as well as it does just because it's able to be self-aware, but because it does deliver, and it fires on all cylinders, including the violent ones. Moving forward from this, there is still so much to discuss, but I want to talk about the most important aspect of every one of these films for me. The defining factor, the make or break, you guessed it folks, we're talking killers. Usually it's pretty easy for me to predict the way that any given movie will end, and when it comes to the Scream franchise, it's no exception. I remember watching the original trilogy and practically guessing every killer before any reveal ever happened, but I will admit, Scream 4 had me stumped on my first viewing. I tried to use my context clues to the best of my abilities, but I gotta hand it to Kevin Williamson on this one. Making Jill and Charlie the killers of this movie was easily the best decision that could have been made. As I mentioned before, Jill was introduced primarily as the cousin of Sydney, so while she is part of the story, we never really suspect her. We just see another potential victim. Charlie, on the other hand, playing one of the film buffs, is the one character that we would suspect. I mean, after all, 3 of the killers in the past films all followed the same pattern. And for a long time when I was watching this film, I did suspect Charlie, and then this scene happened. At this point in the film, I really didn't know who to suspect other than Trevor. It was the only logical option, but in those short few moments where you begin to question yourself and who it could possibly be, he stabs Kirby. We could go on forever about why these characters work, but I'm really going to be giving all the credit here to Jill. Not only does she want revenge, she wants fame, and she's taking out 2 birds with 1 stone, or so she thought. The last thing I really want to discuss for this installment is the added trope that I somehow forgot existed, and that is the false ending trope. This trend kind of became popular in the second half of the 2000s. Basically, how this trend works is the film builds up a climactic sequence that is presented to the audience as this final showdown type of moment. Most of the time, this trope is executed by giving us an ending that the audience doesn't expect. An ending where our protagonist dies, for example. We then move past this climactic sequence only for the film to reveal that this didn't happen. Sydney even makes a comment about how you could consider it an alternate ending, which was also very overdone during this era.
Consider this an alternate ending.
I actually really like the sequence because it's very brutal, it's unrelenting, and somehow still manages to keep me invested. Most of the time when a movie did this, it never worked for me, but in the case of Scream 4, it's actually one of my favorite moments in the whole franchise. Finally, we arrive at what is the biggest takeaway from this film for me, and that is the camera work and cinematography, because it's incredibly lazy. While the original trilogy isn't like astounding as far as visuals go, they're at least far more interesting than this one. The first 3 films do carry a sense of life and darkness in this camera work, peering around corners and just being creative with the camera work overall. There's also this horrible filter that is present through the entirety of the film. It's incredibly distracting, and every time I watch this movie I notice it. Why they did it for this specific installment, I have no idea, but I felt like I had to address it. I don't really have much else to say about this area of the film in particular. The visuals in this film are lazy, but we can move past that. I really like Scream 4, and a lot of people don't, but I can understand why. So, let's move on to Scream 5. Scream 2022, or Scream 5, or Scream, whatever you want to call it, released earlier this year. 11 years after Scream 4, and there is a lot to say about this film. First off, the film opened at number 1 on its opening weekend with a whopping $30 million. Since then, the film has overall grossed a little over $130 million and already has a 6th movie greenlit. I gotta say, this is actually surprising to me considering that Scream 4 had underperformed and we are in the middle of a pandemic. But I think it also kind of makes sense, not only because this is a franchise that has been evolving since the 90s, but it also has just gained a huge following in the last 10 years from younger audiences. There's a scene in the film that accurately describes this, and I even know a couple of friends who have ghost face tattoos, so it would make sense that this film did as well as it did because the demographic for this film has just grown exponentially. So here we are, 25 years after the original, Scream has officially become a requel franchise, but let's be honest, what else were we to expect from a 5th Scream movie? This era sort of snuck up on us very slowly in the past 10 years, and I really don't see any sign of it stopping. With this new era comes a new wave of tropes and cliches. One of the most famous ones that I've noticed is using the title of the original film again. For some reason, Hollywood has started this trend of releasing legacy sequels for just about every existing franchise. The most notable factor in just about all of these movies is bringing back the original cast and making the exact same movie as the original with some key elements that are altered in some way to make it seem fresh for a younger generation to enjoy. I feel like this was definitely the easiest route for this movie to take. The Scream movies have always been satire on the horror genre, but in the year 2022, there's no way that Scream could still be doing this. The horror genre has become such an amalgamation of styles and subgenres, and the only slasher films we've gotten in the last 10 years were also requels, or legacy sequels. And yeah, they have the same title as the original. The slasher genre has only been giving us requels. So that's what Scream 5 gave us. They gave us Scream again. At this point, I think we all know the tropes and everything that has made the Scream franchise what it is. There's no film within a film opening in Scream 5, just a good old-fashioned opening kill. Mirroring the original, this film follows just about every action that Drew Barrymore had in 1996 during the original. It's almost identical with the exception of a few additional items that live in the modern age, cell phones and a home security system. This may seem like a small detail, but it actually changes this film drastically. Most of the time, movie logic just says, hey, we're gonna destroy this phone so this character is screwed, and it'll be the easiest MacGuffin to get past. That's why so many modern horror movies have the main character set somewhere where they won't have a signal. The convenience of having someone to save them at any time, I guess, makes audiences feel like there's no help whatsoever. So the characters are screwed, and if they die, oh well, there's nothing they can do about it. But this film is smart, and it makes the bold decision to give her a phone and a security system, so in theory she should have nothing to worry about, but somehow the killer has hacked the security system, so she's still gonna get attacked. I can't say much on this other than the fact that we probably shouldn't overthink it. Hacking the security system probably doesn't matter, and all that really matters is that this is the opening kill. Except it isn't. Scream 5 is the first film in the franchise that decided to keep the first victim alive. Now, I don't know about you, but I was really surprised by this upon my first viewing. It's not like there's anything wrong with keeping the victim from the first attack alive, it had just never been done before for this franchise. It's pretty quick that we learn that she has a sister, and this is where things start to get even crazier. This film basically follows the same format of the original with a few exceptions. Tara and Sam are basically the leads for this film, but let's be real, this was inevitable. This was a pretty bold decision. They relied on a whole new cast to introduce this movie, and then added the Billy Loomis subplot all within the first 30 minutes. As for Sydney, we could have only gotten so many Scream movies with her as the lead, and while her time with us was wonderful, this is still a pretty decent movie. And in a respectful manner, this film manages to give us a similar story to the first, while also giving us our original heroes. This movie had me hooked from the start. The plotline with Sam being Billy's daughter was the one decision that I think has made this film stand out significantly from other legacy sequels that have tried to do something similar to this. Every Star Wars movie in the sequel trilogy did this with random characters, and fans would speculate that they were the child of some character from the original franchise, and it got old really fast. But somehow it worked for this movie. Maybe it's because we didn't put too much thought into it, like we weren't anticipating anything like this. All we really wanted was another Scream movie, and this movie surprised us with some meat on its bones. So now we have a link to something from the original, something to make us give a shit about these characters. This film didn't really need to rely on Sydney or Dewey or Gale at all. I truly think that this movie could have worked without them, but I must say it was nice seeing them again. I also like that they brought back Judy Hicks' character and made her son part of the story. I was worried that maybe her character would have been forgotten about, but they actually made pretty good use of her. Overall, I like the new cast quite a bit, with the exception of this one character. It's not like she was bad, I just never really cared about her, but this film does progress in a very fun and logical way. We don't really see any of the original cast until about 30 minutes into the movie, and by that point, I was already invested. Having Dewey take the lead on the action for this movie felt a lot like Han in The Force Awakens. I mean, realistically, this film kind of follows the same pattern by also saving Sydney for last. Of course, he didn't show up until the last scene, but you get the point. I think the legacy sequel format that this movie takes works incredibly well. It somehow meshes all of the ideas of self-commentary that has been made on the genre and turned it on its head, even to the point of remaking the final scene of this film almost identical to the original film. I really don't have much to say about this. The recall exposition dump that is needed for this is featured in the scene with the niece of Randy explaining everything. I think this is a really fun and well thought out movie that honors the original, so now let's get to my favorite part of every film, the killers. In every Scream movie, my favorite part on my first viewing has been trying to guess who the killer is, and if you're wondering if I guessed it right for this one, I did. I suspected the boyfriend of Samantha the entire time, but I also suspected that there would be a second killer, and that was the only one that stumped me. As for who was chosen to be the killers, I wasn't like crazy about it, but I wasn't disappointed by it either. I think the idea of two crazy fans of the franchise wanting to create their own version of these movies is plausible. I mean, just look at the Star Wars franchise. It's pretty obvious that they were going for some sort of commentary on how toxic fandom culture can be at times, and I think it's actually pretty clever. Not like in a genuinely smart way, but if you're gonna poke fun at something, you may as well look at the times that we're living in. I don't think these are the worst villains the franchise has had, but it wasn't a bad choice. Jack Quaid as Richie does pretty good with what he's given, but Mikey Madison as Amber really brought this home for me. Her performance is hilarious and just so unhinged. She stole every scene that she was in, and I think she was a great choice as the killer. She was very entertaining and a lot of fun to watch. As for any takeaways this film has, I don't really have that much. I think some of the jokes are a bit on the nose at times, and this girl who plays the lead can be a bit stiff sometimes. She works for me most of the time, but every now and then she'll just deliver a line in such a weird way that it kind of takes me out of it. I see some people describe her as wooden, but I think she's alright. Every now and then she can be a bit off, but for the most part she feels like she delivers. Overall, I really like this film, and I think the future looks bright for this franchise. The timing of its release worked really well with the material that it worked with. Although I do always like to see a good Scream movie, part of me does wish that they would hold back on making another installment, at least for a while. I think the reason this film worked as well as it did was due to the fact that it had such a big time gap from the installment before it. A cultural shift had taken place with technology and trends that made this film a breath of fresh air. We got everything that Scream had become while adapting to the times that they were released in. I can't say that I'm particularly excited for this new installment coming so soon, but you can bet I will be there opening night. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really had a blast doing these videos and rewatching the franchise over again. Make sure to like and comment down below, and if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to do that as well. I'll see you guys in the next video.